Peace and blessing. Genesis 1:14 says that the sun, moon, and stars are for signs, for seasons, for days, and for years. I touched on signs in the new moon study, and I covered days and years in their respective studies. So let's deal with seasons. The Hebrew word here, which is moed, does not refer to spring, summer, fall, and winter. It refers to Yah's appointed times, or family meetings, if you will. So I want to start with the two hidden Moedim. The first one is the daily offerings. Numbers 28 verse 1 says, And Yahuwah spake unto Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel, and say unto them, My offering and my bread for my sacrifices made by fire, a sweet savor unto me, shall ye observe to offer unto me in their due season. And this word season is also moed. And thou shalt say unto them, This is the offering made by fire, which ye shall offer unto Yahuwah. 2 lambs of the first year, without spot, day by day, a continual burnt offering. The one lamb shalt thou offer in the morning, and the other lamb shalt thou offer at even. This is the first Moedim. The second is the new moon offering. Verse 11 says, And in the beginnings of your months ye shall offer a burnt offering unto Yahuwah, 2 young bullocks and 1 ram, 7 lambs of the first year without spot. These two we don't really hear very much about, but they are 2 of the Moedim. So let's move on to the holy convocations. First, what is a holy convocation? The Hebrew word miqra, meaning convocation or reading, comes from the word kara, meaning to call, proclaim, or read. Based on this, I take this to mean reading the Holy Scriptures aloud. In ancient times, the people would have had to gather to do this because only certain people had copies of the Scriptures. But now everyone has access to the Scriptures, so this can be done at home. However, I do believe that these holy convocations will be kept as gatherings in the future. So let's go through the holy convocations listed in Leviticus 23. To make this easier, I will be looking at this in the interlinear, which reads from right to left. The first, which we see in verse 3, is the 7th day. This is called a Shabbat Shabbaton, which is a day of complete rest from all work, and it is also a holy convocation. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th is a Sabbath of solemn rest. This means it occurs every 7th day following 6 days of work. So an unbroken cycle of 6 plus 1. This means lunar Sabbath is out. The moon is for marking months and nights, not days. Days are marked by the sun, as I show in my study of the day. This word Shabbat is only ever used for 3 distinct times. Those are the weekly Sabbath, the Day of Atonement, which is the 7th Holy Convocation, and the 7th year rest of the land. So this is always related to the 7th in a series. Shabbaton also applies to these 3 days, as well as all of the holy convocations of the 7th month. This will be important later. Next is the Passover. Passover is to be kept at a specific time. This time in the Hebrew is Ben Ha'arbayim and is translated at twilight. But the literal translation for Ben is an interval or space between, and Ha'arbayim is from Erev, meaning evening. So the literal translation for this is between the evenings. And this specific time spoken of is seen in Yeshua's crucifixion, as he died at the 9th hour of the day, which is 3 p.m. This is also the same time as the daily evening sacrifice. So the entire day is not a holy convocation, just 3 p.m. and after, similar to a half day. Now, if we go to Exodus 12, verse 8 says, And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. So the Passover is killed in the evening at 3 p.m. Then it is roasted with fire and eaten that night with unleavened bread. So let's move on to the actual feast of unleavened bread. This feast begins on the 15th day of the month and lasts for 7 days. During this time frame, we also have the day of first fruits, or the wave offering. And in verse 11, it says that the priest shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah to be accepted for you. On the day after the Sabbath shall the priest wave it. There are different interpretations of when this day is because of this word Sabbath here. Some people interpret the day after the first day of unleavened bread, because the day of unleavened bread is a holy convocation. But if God wanted to say the 16th, he would have just said the 16th, like he did with Passover, but he didn't do that. He gave us a formula, and formulas contain variables, meaning this has a floating date. Finally, we get to the seventh day, which is the 21st, which is also a holy convocation. And if we go to Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 8 says, 6 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day shall be a solemn assembly to Yahuwah thy God. Thou shalt do no work therein. This word solemn assembly is Atzeret. This word actually means assembly, whereas miqra is normally translated as assembly. So there are two different words being used there. Now, while I'm here, I want to point out that this passage is not saying that Passover is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It is detailing the specifics of keeping the Passover, namely at the temple. After you leave, you eat unleavened bread 6 days, followed by a solemn assembly and holy convocation on the last day of unleavened bread. And this brings me to another point in Exodus 12. Verse 18 says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. So the reason that this is saying this way is because the Passover, as I already pointed out, is eaten at night with unleavened bread. So there is no restriction on eating leaven on the 14th day. The restriction begins in the evening. And if we go into the Hebrew here, evening is by Ereb, which generally means sunset, as opposed to Ben Harbayim, which is pinpointing the 9th hour of the day, or 3 p.m. But just in case, I personally would consider it best practice not to eat leaven after the Passover has been killed. So based on this analysis, there are only 7 days that unleavened bread exclusively must be eaten. Notice it doesn't say 7 days and 7 nights. So the most precise interpretation is to eat unleavened bread on the 14th night with the Passover and then each of the following days. So to clarify, Passover is not the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They are two separate feasts. So let's move on to Shabuot 15. And you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Until after the day of the 7th Sabbath, you shall number 50 days. Then you shall offer a new grain offering to Yahuwah. So this is a 2-part formula. Let's go to Deuteronomy 16. Verse 9. 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such time as thou begin to put the sickle to the corn. And thou shalt keep the feast of weeks unto Yahuwah thy God, with the tribute of a freewill offering of thine hand. So based on this, it sounds like the day of the wave offering marks the beginning of the harvest. Let's break this down. First, it's telling you that the sheaf offering is waved on the day after the Sabbath. We already established that. Then it tells you to count 7 complete Sabbaths from the day that the wave sheaf is offered, and the day after the 7th Sabbath is Shabuot. It also tells you that the amount of days between the wave offering and Shabuot is 50 days. So that is 3 different criteria that have to be met. 1, both days fall on the day after a Sabbath. 2, there are 7 Sabbaths between them. 3, there are 50 days between them. So we are again given formulas to calculate these days, meaning this is a floating date holy day in the same way that the dates for Mother's Day and Father's Day float every year. You cannot use the first of Matzo as the Sabbath here because, as I mentioned before, the word Sabbath is not used for that day. Furthermore, you will not meet the criteria doing it this way unless the first of Matzo falls on the weekly Sabbath. Let me demonstrate this by using this year's calendar. So this year, the date that is being recognized for Passover is Monday, April the 22nd, which means that Tuesday, the 23rd, is the first day of unleavened bread, And if you use that day as the Sabbath, the wave offering would be on Wednesday, the 16th. This would also be the first day of the 50-day count. And I have the days marked for the count in brown. And if we go down to the bottom to day 50, we see that it falls on Wednesday, June 12th. So let me confirm that this is the right date. So here on Google, we see the date for Shavuot. Smack dab in the middle of those is the 12th, which means my calculation is correct based on the way they've calculated it here. But there are a couple of problems here. The first one, as you can see in my markings on the Sabbaths in red, there are only 6 Sabbaths between April 24th and June 12th. That's problem one. The second problem is, what Sabbath falls on June 11th? Let's go back to the criteria. It says, until the day after the 7th Sabbath, you shall number 50 days. Here, they have the 50th day in the middle of the week. So this doesn't work. Now, let's look at my count. I have Passover falling on Sunday, the 21st. But even if it falls on Monday, the 22nd, it's going to end up being the same based on how I calculated. So Passover is on the 21st. The wave offering would be the following Sunday. This would also be day 1 of the count. I have the day count marked on Sundays and the Sabbath count marked on Shabbat. And if we scroll down to day 50, we get June 16, the morrow after the 7th Sabbath. In using the formula that God gave, you always end up meeting the criteria that he set forth. 50 days, 7 Sabbaths, 7 weeks. This shouldn't even really be an issue. So this brings me to the real dilemma that I have, because there are 2 ways to meet all of the criteria. The first is by using the Sabbath that falls within unleavened bread. If the day of unleavened bread falls on the first day of the week, then the wave offering is on the first day of the next week, which will be on the 22nd. And that would put the wave offering outside of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But if we use the Sabbath after the Passover, when the Passover falls on the first day of the week, the wave offering is the first day of the following week, which will be the last day of unleavened bread. And when the Passover falls on the Sabbath, the wave offering is the next day, which is the first day of unleavened bread. So the only time that you have a difference between these two is when the Passover falls on the weekly Sabbath. Now, if we go back to Leviticus 23 and the instructions for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, verse 8 says, "But you shall offer an offering made by fire for Yahuwah 7 days." So each day of unleavened bread, you are to make an offering to Yahuwah. And because of this instruction, I believe that using the Sabbath after the Passover is more in line with this, because you already have to make an offering each day of the feast. So it makes sense that the wave offering would also be on one of the days of the feast and not falling outside of the feast. But this is also where Deuteronomy 16:9 throws me a bit, because if we follow the Passover schedule, in 2 cases, the wave offering falls on the holy convocations. And on these days, occupational work is forbidden. And if the wave offering day is the first day of harvest, you would have to harvest an omer to bring for the offering. So the question is, would this be considered occupational work? And I believe that the answer lies in the formula itself. The fact that God formulated this offering in such a way that it never falls on the weekly Sabbath, on which all work is forbidden, makes me think that he set it up this way to allow for the harvest of just enough grain to bring for the offering and to mark the beginning of the harvest season. Also, as Yeshua proved when he healed on the Sabbath and pointed out that the priests work on the Sabbath, obedience to God and doing his work on the Sabbath is the actual fulfillment of the Sabbath command. So that is my understanding of the calculation for the wave offering and Shabuot. So let's move to Yom Teruah, verse 23. And Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Shabbaton, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any customary work. So the word Teruah here, it actually means a shout or blast of war, alarm, or joy. So this word is normally translated as blowing of trumpets, but the word trumpet is not actually there. But I do believe that in most cases, it is proper to add the word trumpets there. So based on my interpretation of this, it will be the first day after the moon no longer gives its light. Next is Yom Kippur. And Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, also the 10th day of the 7th month, this shall be the day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you, and you shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. And you shall do no work on this same day. So this day is to be observed on the 10th day of the month. But if we continue in verse 32, it says, it shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest, or a Shabbaton. You shall afflict your souls on the 9th day of the month at evening. From evening to evening, you shall celebrate your Sabbath. So Yahuwah specifies here that this particular moed is to begin in the evening. He didn't say that about any of the other feasts. So if the day begins in the evening, this would be redundant. But the day doesn't begin in the evening, and that's why he's specifically telling you that this moed is to begin in the evening. This indicates that this is an exception, not the rule. So let's move on to Sukkot. And Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days to Yahuwah. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. So Sukkot is from the 15th day of the 7th month to the 21st day of the 7th month. And the 15th is a holy convocation. Next it says, on the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. It is a sacred assembly. You shall do no customary work on it. So the 8th day, which is the 22nd day of the 7th month, is a holy convocation, and it is also a solemn assembly. This day is not a part of the feast of Sukkot. It is a separate feast, the same way that Passover is separate from the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So this concludes my understanding of the new day, the new month, the new year, and Yahuwah's Moedim. Thank you for joining me. Feel free to drop any comments, concerns, agreements, or disagreements in the comment section below. I hope that this study has blessed you and inspired you to search further into Yah's word. May Yahuwah bless you and keep you. May Yahuwah shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May Yahuwah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.